Recently, the Ministry of Education in Taiwan, 教育部, released a document to Professor He to defend. This is something that Tsai Ing-wen turned in after she supposedly returned from London and turned in some documentation on her PhD. And the name of her thesis that she wrote down was not unfair trade practices and safeguard actions. I mean, even I know the name of her thesis by now, and she can't seem to get it right.
那张公文呢，附了一张我们从来没有看过的政治大学教师资格审查履历表，这是关键，这是破案的关键。啊，刚刚一再跟大家说明的是。他所有的资料都是 unfair trade 这个论文题目，可是这是因为他要提到教育部要去申请正式教育部的核定的时候，这张履历表上面这边的他的论文题目居然不是从来以为的 unfair trade， 而是 loss of subsidies and dumping and 什么什么 market。这个题目没见过。
Apparently, Tsai Ing-wen wrote down on her documentation to the Ministry of Education that the name of her thesis was Law of Subsidies, Dumping and Market Safeguards. Okay, so what happened to unfair trade practices and safeguard actions? This is very confusing. And I heard later on the presidential office said, oh, that's part 2 of her thesis.
这件事爆出来之后，总统府又发言了，他说这个是他 unfair trade part 2， 是 part 2， 是 part 2。
I have her so-called thesis on my tablet here. Part 2 really is law subsidies, dumping, and market safeguards. So, I mean, I don't know who writes part 2 of your thesis when someone asks you the name of your thesis. I mean, like, this is like kind of like unheard of, but you know what? Sometimes we get confused and we write down the wrong name of our thesis or something like that. So I think it's this is no longer an investigation into whether or not she has a PhD or not. This is just like a comedy show. I would like to see the presidential office spokespersons come out and address this. Like, you know, I want to see Huang Congyan and that guy Zhang Dunhan come out and respond to some of these hilarious things, you know, like, oh, she put down the wrong name of her thesis. Yeah, like, what's going on with, like, why she has 3 different certificates? Like, can Huang Congyan please tell us, like, why her replacement certificates don't look like her alleged original 1984 diploma? I mean, like, we keep asking nicely, and he's like being really mean about it.
我再多问一下哈，因为有些是时辰问清楚啊，比如说总统好像他的毕业证书是不见的，但是不见的时间点到底是什么时候不见的？他大概什么时候发现的？啊，他什么时候比如他之前包括说2010年参选，2012年参选，2016年参选，他的毕业证书那时候是用新的还是用旧的？
你似乎没有认真把刚刚的这个说明听完，等一下 PDF 电子档给你，你大概就会知道这个来龙去脉。
所以你能不能现在说明？
我刚刚已经说明了，我刚刚说明的很清楚。2010年他为了参选，当时跟学校申请的补发提供给中学会，这样是不是很清楚？然后12年之后当然是不用，因为你之前已经提交过了。
Like, does he not know if this diploma was lost by Tsai or not? Or like, you know, when was it lost? Why was it replaced? You know, and why doesn't it look like the original 1984 diploma? So, I mean, could you please tell us nicely, like, instead of getting mad at us? Anyway, I just think this whole thing's it's just here for entertainment. I mean, Taiwan, the Republic of China, just doesn't have credibility as a government if the head of state, the president, can just like blatantly break the law and serve in public office with a fake academic background. It just, you know, you could justify it like, oh, we need to do these things to keep the communists out of Taiwan to protect democracy. But I mean, like, this is like the whole world is looking at this. Like, Like Taiwan's just become a joke. Seriously. I mean, it was a joke a long time ago with Tsai Ing-wen and everything she's done, but I mean, it's just like how much further are we going to put up with this? This reminds me of the 319 case where we kept finding mistakes in the physical evidence. Like, why does Chen Shui-bian have no blood on his underpants, on his underwear? Like, doesn't blood drip down for most people? He has like a very long wound on his belly, a fairly deep wound, like which looks like a cutting wound, and yet he doesn't have like a speck of blood on his underwear. And he's like, oh, well, you know, I just wore my pants low, you know, like just 3 centimeters or whatever below where the wound was. So that's why there's no blood on it.
大家一直在怀疑说，阿扁的裤子、内裤是这样穿的，那是低腰的。我现在所穿的这个位置仍然这个伤口以下至少3公分。
This reminds me a lot of that. Like, oh, you know, she wrote the wrong name down because she accidentally wrote down part 2, like not the title of the thesis. It's just like lame excuse, you know, just like, do you guys actually expect people to believe this kind of stuff, or like you just have nothing else to say? But you know what? The presidential office kind of like hasn't been responding to things for a long time. Like, the so-called photo of Tsai Ing-wen and her older sister that was supposedly taken in London before her Viva examination, like that apparently was from Boston. So like they still haven't responded to that. Like, you know, I guess they don't have anything worth saying. I fully expect Tsai Ing-wen to stay in office until something dramatic happens. Apparently even this kind of evidence isn't good enough in Taiwan. I mean, as soon as I saw it, I was like, okay, that's interesting, but it's not going to be good enough, because nothing's ever good enough. Let's face it. Like, she's not going to like voluntarily step down from office because she's a fraud, you know, like she'll just ignore all of this stuff. Okay, and I do applaud the Ministry of Education for finally telling the truth and, you know, releasing real documentation like that, you know, like, gives me some faith in Taiwan, but not that much. I guess we should just all keep going and, you know, watch how funny this can be. I mean, what do you expect? This is Taiwan, where following the law or rule of law doesn't count anymore. It's just like, well, you know, I'm in power, I control the courts, I have the legislature, so whatever I do is the law. That's Taiwan. Never mind that in a real democracy, in a real democratic nation, a leader would have to step down with this kind of scandal, and that includes the United States. Like, if this was going on in the United States, like, and there was this kind of evidence that was out there, like, the president would not last long and would just step down to avoid further embarrassment, okay? But you know, apparently in Taiwan, like, you know, we have very thick skin.